So my own view is that unless the Americans did something like send large numbers of troops into Pakistan on a regular basis, or actually try to occupy part of the country, this does come up every now and again in Washington. I even had a faint echo of that today. In the last resort, the only way we can quote-unquote clean out the Haqqani network is by going into Pakistan, occupying northern Waziristan. I have it on very good authority that at that point a large part of the Pakistani army would fight. And if their officers told them not to, they would mutiny against their officers. At which point, as I say, the state goes down the drain. If that doesn't happen, my view is that the country will hold together in the short to medium term. I'll come to what happens in the long term in a second. Now, why is it that Pakistan has got itself into a situation where such an attack from the United States is a possibility? Well, I always say here that it's often said that Pakistan is pursuing a two-faced approach to the war on terror. That's totally unfair, and it grossly underestimates the Pakistani capacity for something. The point is that Pakistan is pursuing a four-faced strategy in the war on terror. It has one face for the declared enemies of Pakistan at home, the Pakistani Taliban and their allies. And there, since the spring of 2009, if not before, they have been pursuing a really harsh campaign in many ways, to the extent, of course, that they have the ability to do so, given the deep rottenness of the Pakistani police and judicial system, which, to be perfectly honest, leaves them very often, as they say themselves, at least the counterterrorism police, if they wish to put away, shall we say, a terrorist, the only option is to shoot him in the back of the head, because you cannot get convictions before the courts. Within those limits, they're pursuing a tough campaign until it runs into their second phase. Their second phase is, of course, turned towards the Afghan Taliban, and that is a very positive phase. They are basically supporting them. And two other groups allied to them, one of them semi-allied, namely the Haqqani network, of which we've heard so much, and the Hezb-i Islami of Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, another figure, by the way, who was our ally in the 1980s against the Soviets and communists. Now, why are the Pakistanis doing this? Two things. One you'll hear about because it suits us. The other you won't hear about so much because it doesn't suit us. The reason it suits us is it's the wicked army again. Now, the wicked army comes in two bits as far as this is concerned. One is the rational bits. Now, or shall I say, realist bits rather than rational. And as I'm sure we all know from European history, people who consider themselves realist are not necessarily minimally rational. Some of the most irrational people around can be hardline realists. But anyway, my point is that they are not, at least in their own eyes, barking Islamist crazies. They're doing what they believe to be in the national interest of Pakistan. The national interest of Pakistan, as they see it. Oh, and by the way, as indicated by the previous adapted quote from Voltaire, for them Pakistan is the army and the army is Pakistan. Oh, and by the way, the army is also them, because by definition an army is its generals, no? So any criticism of that. So in other words, as with so many security elites, the country, the army and themselves has merged in their own minds into one indissoluble mass. So anyway, what does this mass want or need? Well, basically they reckon we're going to lose in Afghanistan. They don't think we stand any chance of actually stabilizing this place, creating a working Afghan government, overcoming the ethnic divisions of Afghanistan in the time available to us. They think basically we are going to have to get out, we'll leave a civil war behind, and the Indians are going to back Pakistan's enemies in Afghanistan. Therefore, they say we need allies. We don't necessarily like them very much, but we need allies. The general staff, the Generalität, whatever you want, the High Command, as such, does not, in my view, want a an unconditional Taliban victory in Afghanistan or in the whole of Afghanistan. It's one reason why they're backing other groups as well as the Taliban. The reason for that is twofold. One is that when in the 1990s they did back the Taliban to unconditional victory, the Taliban turned out to be very, very uncomfortable allies for them and got them into 9/11, basically. Secondly, they reckon that if the Taliban ever won control of the whole of Afghanistan, then they really might turn on them, in the name both of helping the Pakistani Taliban to create Islamist revolution, but also in the name of the old Afghan agenda of splitting away the Pashtuns of Pakistan. In the 1950s and 60s, that was a secular nationalist program from Afghanistan, and under the communists as well. In sections of the Taliban, it will be, of course, an Islamist one, but from Pakistan's point of view, it's just as bad. So that's the first thing, why they're doing it. The second thing, which of course we don't stress too much because we're all Democrats, right, is that not the Pakistani Taliban, but the Afghan Taliban have absolutely overwhelming sympathy in the Pashtun areas of Pakistan, and to a lesser but still very significant extent in the country as a whole. The reason for that is not principally, and so this is my observation from a very large number of what we call vox pops on the streets in the Pashtun areas, and talks with people there. And the reason is not complicated. The reason is that they see us in Afghanistan in precisely the same light that they saw the Soviets in the 1980s. It's not, thank God, that most of them support the specific ideological program of the Taliban. It's not that they want them to rule in Pakistan, but it is that within their own country they see them as engaged in what we would call, as we called it in the 1980s, a legitimate resistance struggle against alien occupation. In their terms, they see it as what's called a defensive jihad. Now, something that has been insufficiently spotted by most Western analysis is that, we've made some considerable play of building up the fact, which is true in essence, that in Islamic religious thought, the greater jihad is for personal and social purification and goodness. The lesser jihad is that of armed force. What we haven't noticed so much is the distinction within the lesser jihad between offensive jihads to conquer other places for Islam and convert them. Something which nobody, of course, today actually admits to doing, but if I remember rightly, played a considerable part in Muslim history. Not, of course, that it didn't, though we didn't quite call it that, in Christian history as well, but let's not go there, as the Americans say. But the point is, nobody says they're doing offensive jihad these days. The appeal of the Taliban, of Al-Qaeda, of other groups, is that they say they are engaged in defensive jihad against alien occupiers of Muslim land. I'm sorry to say once again that almost all the Pashtuns and a very large number of other Pakistanis agree with them. It's not that I agree, I hasten to add. I won't get into some of my arguments with Pakistani friends on this, but I have to say from every one of my observations, I would say that my picture of what they think is the case. So, the other thing that the Pakistani army and state are looking at is frankly the feelings of their own people when it comes to sympathy for the Afghan Taliban. So that's the second phase.